What's up, everybody? Lou from Hypocritic here. We are at the Riftbound Regional Qualifiers in Las Vegas, and we are here with Chengran Chai, the executive producer of Riftbound at Riot. Thanks so much for taking some time.
Yeah, of course.
Great to be here with you. So, we are at our third major U.S. or international regionals event after Houston, Bologna, and now here in Las Vegas. What has Riot's sort of high-level take and feedback been on how these experiences have gone, standing them up from ground zero, never having done one in Houston, now a couple iterations under, a lot more planned? How's it all been looking from your perspective?
Yeah, obviously the reception that we have gotten for Spiritforged, for Riftbound in general, has been incredible. We have almost, I think, 5,000 people here in Las Vegas this weekend for the Riftbound tournament. And we are constantly, just learning from every single one that we have done, starting from the first one in Houston, where, obviously there were some issues, but we're learning and iterating upon every single one of these. And I think by far, the current tournament is the smoothest we have had in terms of just, getting people through to lines, getting them through the competition, and everything else.
The experience has been appreciably smoother, I think, from Houston, which you were even talking to Michael Sherman and others at the time. A great just way to stand it up and take a first crack at it, but it's obvious that the iteration has helped with something like this. You talk about getting a lot more people in the door, 5,000 people compared to the, much smaller amount that Houston had, and the challenge of sort of expanding these events to meet the demand, which has been candidly pretty insatiable and pretty extreme. So can you talk a little bit more about some of those steps that Riot takes to sort of figure out, okay, we know people want to play this, we know people want to get to these events, how do we get more people in the door and make these things run smoother for everybody?
Yeah, for sure. I think, certainly we want to, over time, make the capacity of these events, larger. Although I think with TCGs, there's also a stamina issue of if you have 20,000 people, then we're here for like a week playing games, right? And that's probably not something we're looking to do. That being said, I think we're also looking to see other opportunities for players to, let out that competitive, spirit in other places. We have, starting from Nexus Nights at their local game stores to Summoner Skirmishes, and I think we'll continue to explore other events and opportunities in addition to regional qualifiers, where our fans and players can get that competitiveness out into the open.
Yeah, lots of potential there, obviously. So there is also a pretty major difference in dynamic and structure between China's regionals, which have been going on for quite some time, and international ones in other regions. From your perspective, what are some of the key differences you've noticed between China regionals and international regionals, and how, if at all, is Riot sort of learning from each style of event in each region to help improve them for both player bases everywhere?
Yeah, for sure. So one major difference we see actually is that the player base in China tends to actually be a little bit more competitive focused and main event focused, right? So for example, here in Vegas, we have about, I think 1,700 players in the main event. And there's also almost, I think, 3,000, just like spectator and fans and players who are here for the side events. In China, I think most of the players are there for the main event, right? And so they will only play the side events if they cannot get into the main event. And I think the other thing we're seeing is, just the nature of the TCG scene is a little bit different in that, out in the West, it is a lot more developed because there's, TCGs have just been around for longer, and players are very used to, kind of traveling with friends, going out to these. We see some of that developing in China, but I think we're hoping to see more of that over time.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see that dynamic and how it plays out across the different regions. Let's go in on Spiritforged a little bit. So it's been out for a few weeks. People have had their chance to get their hands on product, which it does seem like there's a fair bit more of. So the goal of even ramping up amidst keeping Origins, in production in future sets, seems like that's gone relatively well. And feedback, at least from our perspective, from local game stores and others, has been really positive, especially in terms of getting their hands on product and being able to play it, which is obviously the whole goal. What's, kind of been Riot's high-level takeaways from your perspective on the Spiritforged launch, getting more product out, people, understanding the new meta and how things are coming together with two sets? Any significant takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is just, we needed to act early and faster. I think with Spiritforged, we realized fairly early on that this was potentially a big step for us in terms of expanding our player base, in terms of just, Spirit Blossom is also, from a league IP skin line perspective, probably one of our most popular skin lines as well. And so we knew that there was also going to be a significant amount of collectors and fans out there for this particular set. So we had actually, very, very fortunate early on in the process said, hey, let's make sure we print more of set 2. And so that is, what we're seeing today in terms of there being more product out there was actually, a decision we made probably 6 or even 9 months ago to say, hey, let's get more Spiritforged product out there.
Right.
And I think what we'll continue to do is, obviously monitor the, situation in terms of accessibility in the local game stores, and we will continue to make sure that, more products are coming. Not only for future sets, but also for Origins and Spiritforged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to maybe go a little deeper on that. So from your perspective, it's easy at a high level to say, oh, we got to print more cards. Oh, we got to get more product out there. The machinations of that from a manufacturing and distribution perspective are incredibly complex. Can you give us any additional insight from your perspective on how Riot tries to pull those levers or work with manufacturing partners to get more product out there? When you say at a high level, or when Riot says, we want to print more product and start that ramp up, can you give us any more insight into what that actually looks like from your perspective on putting those plans into motion?
Yeah, so essentially, TCGs have been a pretty hot market, I would say, in most recent years. And so actually, global printing capacity is somewhat constrained. And so when we started Riftbound, we kind of, just took whatever we could get in terms of printing capacity. I think now that Riftbound is more established, I think, we're talking with multiple different manufacturers across multiple continents for them to start printing Riftbound, right? So I think now that, again, we see the amazing player reception and welcome for our game, there's incredible excitement across the whole industry to get more Riftbound products out there, and so that allows us to have these conversations not only to enable future sets to get additional capacity, but also for us to revisit reprinting of the prior sets.
Momentum breeds momentum.
That is exactly
Economies
right.
of scale help, as it turns out. Looking forward even a little bit, we look at something like Vendetta as the point where we're going to achieve global parity for releases synchronized across all regions. Obviously, most know that Riftbound was oriented toward the China market first and foremost. Expanding that reach, not just to English-speaking markets, but international players like French, and I believe other languages are coming in the future. Synchronizing all of that has to be, again, a really significant effort. So as we work toward that, is there any additional insight you can provide on exactly that? How to ramp up production, get the design and development timeline synchronized so that you can achieve something like global parity when people are very clearly clamoring for it?
Yeah, so our current plans is essentially to have China have 4-month sets, and then English be 3 months, and then once we release French and other languages in the future dates, then we will also have accelerated set releases for those additional languages. That is kind of specific to those particular markets. But the overall goal is to catch them up to global kind of parity as quickly as possible, because we understand that players want to play on the latest, cards, meta, whatnot. That is also actually one of the reasons we released our, tournament rules earlier, I think, in a month, where we allowed mixing of cards across different languages, because we know that eventually when, say, for example, French cards come out, we don't want to force the French player to have to, repurchase all of the prior language cards just in order to keep playing Riftbound. We want them to be able to buy the latest and greatest, French cards in, set 3, 4, and 5, and joining on the fun.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And to put a little bow on this now, the last couple, I want to dig into your role a little bit more at Riot. So, as executive producer, you might hear that term across different games or industries, but maybe not have as much insight into what that actually entails. So from your perspective, I know obviously every day is different, but at a high level, can you speak to some of the things that you do that you're responsible for to sort of shed a little light on what your role actually entails relative to the game?
Yeah. What I'll start by saying is exactly what you said, which is I think every single executive producer is a little bit different. in terms of exactly what the game requires, in terms of how they came to that particular role. So I think I'm one of the fortunate cases where Dave and I sort of like started this project. So we had the idea and we said, hey, we want to do this, and kind of just naturally stepped into the role. My day-to-day, I think early on in the incubation and R&D process is more so around just kind of general product direction in terms of, hey, what do we want this game to be? What kind of players and audience do we want this game to serve? And then how do we want to serve that particular audience? I think now that we are out there live in the world, I think Dave and I are like much more than that in terms of like we also have to have public-facing roles and responsibilities, like this press interview we're doing now. But also figuring out how do we continue to level up our team, right? Like so, one of the things that I think about constantly is how do we get more players globally to play Riftbound, because I see actually a ton of interest from regions like Brazil and Japan that we don't currently serve, right? Like, but figuring out how we do it in a way that is sustainable is actually a very challenging problem. Another thing is, for example, there's been a ton of ask for us in terms of like, can we potentially get a digital client, right? Mm-hmm. And that is something we constantly discuss and talk about, like what should our digital strategy be? Because there are certainly pros and cons, right? So I think, my goal on top of, just kind of managing the team, staffing up the team to ensure there's, sufficient resources to deliver Spiritforged and Unleash and Vendetta and these awesome sets we have coming, is also to kind of think ahead for the future on what we could do to kind of like take Riftbound to the next level. I think the last thing I'll say that is, I think, unique to Riftbound and perhaps to Riot is because we have so many great games across our portfolio, League, TFT, Wild Rift, we also have this incredible amount of opportunities to work across, right? Like, so that is another thing that, for me, I'm personally very passionate about is all the potential collaborations we're going to be doing with the other games down the road.
Wink, wink. Lots to come, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, excellent perspective, and we really appreciate the time, Chengran. Thank you so much for the talk here, and keep it tuned here to Hypocritic GG for more from the Las Vegas Regional Qualifiers all weekend long.